Senator Hollings in Charleston, South Carolina. Thank you for coming in. Happy to have you with us today.
Good to be with you.
Now, tell me this. You've heard the hearings. You've talked to a number of people. You have been involved in this program one way or another for some time. At this stage, what are your thoughts on what went wrong?
Well, I think we ought to really refine the conclusion that Chairman Rogers has made, that the process was flawed. Rather, the process was violated. It was reversed. It was overruled. The process was tried and true. And let's get to Bob Crippen's statement, quoted by Alan MacDonald. He said the entire philosophy was for the first time changed. Rather than the contractor justifying why to fly, he was having to justify why not to fly. So I want to know, where's that pressure from? Is it from Congress? Have we been on to the space agency budgetarily? Is it contractor pressure? Is it White House pressure? Is it Pentagon pressure? Somehow this process, tried and true, was violated for the first time, and I think that's the real question.
Well, you raised a lot of questions there about pressure and where it might have come from. Can you answer any of them?
No, but I'd certainly have me about 24 Sam Donaldsons out gumshoeing around and getting me some statements. Now, that's what Chairman Rogers is objected to. He's got 13 commissioners and 12 on the staff, and they're lawyers and staffers and PR people. But I'd have been down there with 5 people taking the statements at Canaveral and at Huntsville and at Houston and at Brigham City and then all over Washington, from the NASA Space Headquarters to the Pentagon to the White House. Everyone had an interest in seeing this go that day with Christa McAuliffe. The pressure was building. There isn't any question about it to get it up there. And here comes the contractors, and there's not one single positive pro-launch statement. Now, that's a good process to be adhered to or obeyed. On the contrary, it was disobeyed and overruled.
But, Senator, we already have the statements of the people from Huntsville. Not only did they testify before the commission, but you know the next day, on Friday, they held a news conference to say, in effect, they disagreed with Chairman Rogers. The process is not flawed. It's almost as if the space shuttle had not blown up. So what are you going to get from them?
No, that's not the entire... You think that's the entire statement from Huntsville? I'll bet you I can go down there and get 5 statements contradicting the head of Huntsville and all the rest of them. I could go down to the Cape and get contrary statements. Actually, MacDonald spoke out and now has quit his job. Those kind of statements and that kind of evidence is disappearing, and we're not on top of it. Now, the gumshoes from Aviation Weekly and ABC, they're up there.
Senator, let me suggest a forum and ask you about this. What about a grand jury? A grand jury to check into the possible criminal negligence for indictment and trial of some of these people?
No, I think that would be the wrong course. We're not looking for criminality. We're looking for correction. We're looking for correction. Where does the pressure come from? It could devolve into that, but right at the moment, we ought not to obscure it with everybody clamming up, because nobody really wants to send anybody to jail. But I certainly wouldn't have that manager standing around when the contractor comes and says it's unsafe, and he blandly saying, I thought that was just a concern and not an objection. That's absolute nonsense.
And you don't think there's any possible criminal negligence involved here, as the law would define it, as it would define it in any other case?
I don't think, Sam, I'm not going to make that kind of charge. I'm looking for the correction of the process itself.
Senator, let's stay with the series of questions you raised about pressure. You mentioned perhaps pressure from the White House. Let's bring something out on the floor that's been talked about in Washington rather surreptitiously. That is it possible that there was pressure from somewhere in the White House to get this shuttle up because it would have coincided nicely with the State of the Union address, which was going to refer to it?
Yeah, that's been the statement all over Washington, and it ought to be cleared up. In other words, who in the White House was in contact with Canaveral? How were they in contact? Through Dr. Graham over at NASA or in direct contact? You know, the Sunday before Tuesday, they had the vice president scheduled to be there. They had all the dignitaries. I had school children wired up in South Carolina to watch this particular launch. And so it could have come from the White House to get it up in time for the State of the Union message. On the other hand, it could have come from NASA on the White House. But let's find out from where.
Senator and George, let me just say in fairness to the White House, Larry Speakes has attempted to answer that question. He has called that a vicious rumor. He has denied flatly on the public record that anyone at the White House put any sort of overt or any other kind of pressure. Now, I'm not passing on Mr. Speakes' statement. I think it ought to be put on the public record here.
I think so, too. I agree with you. But then who was in contact? You can't tell me the White House wasn't in contact with that particular launch. What was said, who was called, and when were they called? Because everyone at this particular point at the Cape says, for the first time, the entire philosophy and process was reversed. It was violated. Now, why?
Let's ask two other questions about pressure. There was a certain inherent pressure in this because Christy McAuliffe was aboard, the school teacher. If she weren't aboard, is it possible they might not have launched? Do you think it's just the fact that there was an element of public relations and show business involved that tipped the scales?
That could be. I really don't know. I don't believe any of us know at this point, but I think you're going to have to get a lot of investigators out there taking a lot of statements to clear up those ideas, because you can't bring in a Rogers Commission report here in 120 days and then investigate it like we have the Warren Commission for the next 20 years. That's what I don't want to happen.
Senator, before our time runs out, you talked, I believe, to Alan McDonald, the Thiokol engineer, who said this shuttle should not have been launched. What did he say to you?
He said exactly that, and there wasn't any question, there wasn't any mealy-mouthed talk. He was violently not only opposing it, they went over his head. You see, he was the one who customarily, usually gave the permission. They overruled him and got a written permission for the first time 2,000 miles uprange in Brigham City, Utah. Thereupon, the next morning, Alan McDonald was still objecting even over the written permission given from his company. I thought that was very significant, and he was only asking for 4 hours to come into the late afternoon where it was originally scheduled for Tuesday afternoon and not Tuesday morning. Who rescheduled it for Tuesday morning and was forcing it to go up that particular morning?
Senator, NASA in general and the Space Shuttle program in particular has been under budgetary pressure because, in a way, they oversold the shuttle in order to save it when it was under heavy political attack more than a decade ago. Is it possible that in the current budgetary climate, they feel an extraordinary and perhaps irresponsible pressure to keep on a schedule that simply isn't realistic?
Yes, it could have been institutional pressure. I've said that from the beginning. That's what it appears really to me at this point, that it came right from NASA itself, and somehow or the other they said, look, here are these cuts coming and everything else like that. In order to go forward and get approval with the space station, we have to get these man-launched flights up there now. We can't have the Pentagon complaining and everything else of that kind. We got to get ahead of the curve, so to speak, and they could have brought it on themselves. But all of this should be cleared up, not looking around so much for the technical. We all still want to know, but it's quite obvious what has happened down there, and now we want to know why it's happened.
Senator Hollings, thank you. Thanks very much for coming in.
Yes, sir.